Hello everyone, welcome to Vert Mode. I'm excited to give you a sneak peek at our new course, Mastering Human Anatomy for 3D Artists. In this course, we dive deep into the captivating world of human anatomy, exploring techniques used by master artists throughout history to create anatomically accurate models. If you want to follow along with this demonstration, sign up for our emailing list to receive access to the image planes I'm using right now. And if you're ready to take your skills to the next level, enroll in the full course on Udemy. Links to our emailing list and Udemy page can be found in the video description. Let's get started.
All right, so now that we have our body in and we have some of the necessary edge loops in place to do some of the other structures, we're going to work our way down here into the foot and we're going to start shaping the foot. Now, there's some things I might want to check beforehand. You can see these are getting a little bit tight, so I might want to hop into the front view here and just see how I've squared these up. And I'll share a little secret with you. These first three slots here are 3 toes, the 3 middle toes. So you can see these are a little bit too large. So I'm just going to scale these in to kind of match up with those 3 middle toes here. And this is going to give me room for the next extrusions I need to make. And I'm going to do the same back here with the heel. Maybe do this in face mode, just so I can shrink these in a little bit easier and bring these in as well. And I know we took quite a bit of time shaping those. That was a bit of a failure on my front in terms of foresight, but sometimes you have to go back and forth when you're modeling when you realize, hey, this is going to be a 3-toed sloth and not a human if we're not careful here. Okay, so how are we going to get those other 2 toes? A really neat trick here is we're going to go into face mode here, and we're going to select the faces running around the foot here, all the way around except for the front 3. So you'll see how I've done that. And then we're just going to perform an extrude. Now I'm going to use an extrude tool for this. I'm not going to use the shift. You can either find the extrude in the modeling toolkit under extrude, which is my preference, or you can come up here to the edit mesh menu and you can find the extrude here. So either one works. It's the exact same tool. Since I'm up here, I'll just press it and we'll pull that out. Now, when you extrude with this setup, you're going to extrude out like so to bring out the room for that final toe. And what you're going to see here is we get a pretty neat little topology trick where we've gained 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 toes here, but we haven't added any topology upstream to the body. So we have no edges running up the legs, into the torso, into the arms. So it's just a really nice way to get that set up. Now, from here, we need to take a moment to shape this. And what we want to do is just kind of pull down these to create a foot shape. So we're going to come back around this edge here. I'm just going to shift double click and whoop, pull that down. And you'll see now we get some volume to the foot. Now, we want to take a moment here to just kind of shape these if we can. But we're going to add in a couple more edge loops to help us out with that. We're going to add 2 running across the front here, just to make it so we're not dealing with these perfect slopes. We'll just add 1 edge loop here and 1 edge loop here, so that way we have a little bit more to shape with. Just like we did with the body previously, we can hop into our various views and we can start pushing and pulling these to start to shape the foot. So I'll go ahead and start with these top ones. I'm actually going to double click them and just scale them to be flat. That way we're dealing with something a little bit easier to see in terms of the silhouette. And I'm just going to drop these to match up with the foot shape a bit better. Then with these side ones, I'm also going to pull these to be flatter. I might even scale them to be flat. This isn't really necessary, I would say. It's just one of those things that makes it a little bit easier to work with symmetrically. So I like to do it, keeps things a little bit more orderly. There's some areas like back here where it's like, okay, well, maybe I don't want to do that. And especially when you get to the base here, you'll see, yeah, we probably don't. But I will move these forward as a unit, like so. And you can see how that's going to form a nice heel. And we can go ahead and adjust these now to form that heel on the back side here. And we'll just go ahead and tweak that. All right. Now you'll notice the foot does have some shape to it too. It's not perfectly flat. That's something we could experiment with at this point. It's just kind of matching some of these things up a little bit more. This is some of that subtle detail that we're really going to get into the sculpting pass, and it's going to be lost when we smooth, so I'm not worried about it. For example, the back heel there, you'll see when I press 3, how that currently goes into a heel shape. We are going to be using subdivision on this, so that's one of those things where you might want to just leave them be. And as a matter of fact, you may even want to just flatten them down entirely because the roundness will come naturally, and we'll be sculpting that in later. All right, let's take a look at it from the front because these do not look correct. So what I'll do now is work my way back here into these areas, and I'll want to use my orthographic view to assist me in shaping these. Now, it would actually be beneficial if we had a top view, and perhaps later on I will produce that in the sculpting stage for you all. But for now, we just kind of have to use our eyeball and our understanding of what foot shape means to kind of craft this into the shape of the foot we're looking for. And this is where I want to emphasize anatomy knowledge starts to come in handy, right? You can look at a picture of a foot all day long, but unless you know the structures of a foot, you're going to have a hard time recreating it perfectly without that base foundational knowledge. So, what does a foot shape look like? And hopefully all of you have feet. I know some of you may not. Life can be difficult. But you can look at your own feet. There's also tons of feet pictures on the internet, free and paid. Strange place the internet is. So, yeah, you can go look up feet there if you need some assistance. Something like that's looking pretty good. Some of the things feet tend to have is a bit more of an arch going in on this side, classical footprint shape, and this tends to come out a bit more. It's actually a bone right here, which we will talk about later. And there's actually an arch to the foot, and you can feel that on your own foot, where the outside padding touches the ground more than the inside here. So something we could do is we could actually pull this up here on this side a little bit to kind of start shaping in a slope. Now, I'm going to worry about that later. I'm not going to worry about it now because there still is some edge loops we want to get in here. But something like this will give us a good base foot shape to start with. We want to make sure our toes are kind of coming out to the base of where we see the toes here. And the middle lines fall in between the toes as much as possible. So if I come into this one here, for example, that should be in the middle of the big toes crack. And I can come to the next one, move that over to the next one, do the same with the next one here, and then this final one between the last two. And there we go. That will give us a start. The toe also has a bit of a slope to it. You'll notice I've made these all kind of even. What you see with the foot in particular is sort of this gradual slope up to the big toe. So I'm going to come down to approximately where I think the top of these are, and then let this settle on the very top, which I can kind of gauge from the side view there, and then just kind of adjust them back to work with this. So I think this is a bit harsh of a slope, so I'm just going to adjust this to be something like that, and then this side actually comes down a little bit. All right, so that is going to give us a base extrusion there for the foot to begin with. One other thing you're going to notice about the feet is that they have gradually different points for starting. I don't know if this is as well seen here, but you can see it on your own foot. And I don't remember if this is something that varies by ethnicity. There are slightly different feet things that differ based on what region of the world you come from. And some of you, if you've spent enough time on the internet, may have seen those, but it goes something a bit like this, where it slopes across the front. So that's something we might want to capture now, potentially. And that will deal in with the toe lengths later. You might think you have different length toes, and they do vary in length, but actually a lot of them vary in connection point more than length, which is kind of funny. Same with your hand for the most part. But something like that is going to give us a good start point there, I think, for what we're aiming for. And we can round this foot a bit more, coming up into here with some of the additional edge loops we've added. So it's not a Minecraft foot. It's not super blocky. And just for reference, the ridge of the foot goes along the big toe for the most part. I'm kind of offsetting it one section, but that will give us something similar to what we're looking for. So now we're ready to kind of add in the detail we need for the toes. The next thing we need is an edge loop around here to create a midsection so we can have round toes instead of square toes. So I'm going to come into my multi-cut here and just hold down Control to add an edge loop that goes around the center of the foot here. I am going to scale this to be flat just out of preference. It's not really something that needs to be done, but I do kind of prefer to do it that way. That way it's just kind of even to begin with. And we are going to come in here and adjust this to be in the midsection of these for the most part. So something like this. And with this added, you can see now we gain the additional ability to kind of tuck the foot under. So this is where we might want to come in and just do a quick little tuck here. I'm going to grab these bottom faces. I'm doing this by holding Tab and then R to scale here, and just tucking that a little bit there to create sort of that heel shape. And then as we smooth, you're going to see that tuck under. All right, so that's going to get us the base foot set up here to add in our toes. It can be useful to flatten out the front area where the toes are going to be added. Like I mentioned, I kind of didn't do that. I made it art. But we can flatten that front one, the big toe. We're going to start there. That's going to be a little bit easier to work with. And we can adjust this. And we can always flatten the neighboring areas as we go, as we see needed. I am going to shape this to be a little bit more even here. So we'll have the ability to plug a toe into that easier. And then we'll start out with that big toe as our first toe. So at this point, what I want you to do is I want you to get to this stage, and I want you to spend a bit of time just kind of rounding out the geometry and getting this to look like a foot shape before we move forward and we start adding in the toes. Just like we did with the torso, have a good look around here, look at each of the areas. Make sure it's matching the silhouette of our concept from the front, side, and back as much as possible. Get this to be nice and not blocky anymore and as foot-like as possible. Okay, so be sure to do all of this before moving to the toes. And as with our previous sections, make sure you save out an iteration here. I'm going to save this out as 04. That way, if something goes wrong in the next stage, you will be able to come back and revisit this and use this as a launch point for where you were at. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I might pull out this area here just briefly for the ankle, as well as this outer area. And we'll go from there. So as a challenge, go ahead and get the structure set up for the foot, do the extrusion, add in the necessary edge loops, and then we'll go ahead and tackle the big toe next. Now that we have our foot shape in place, we're ready to go ahead and start adding in the toes. So we're going to add in 2 of the toes to begin with, and then we're going to look at the ability to duplicate one of the toes to create the rest of the toes. Now, why are we creating 2 toes? The first toe, our big toe, is different from all the other toes. So if you follow the theory of evolution, feet were essentially the beginning of the hand, if that makes sense. So you can think of a foot as a primitive hand, and your big toe is actually the equivalent of a thumb. Now, what's interesting is the angle our thumb sits at. So if I draw a hand, I'm going to draw my thumb something like this, and I'm going to draw my finger something like this, right? And the thing about that is if you look at your thumb angle, it's kind of shooting out to a side. And if you look at your fingers, they're kind of going upwards. Now your toes are similar. What happens with the big toe is the big toe has this upward angle, like so. And that's going to be what your big toe looks like. And right next to your big toe are your smaller toes. And the thing that's weird about your smaller toes is they have a downward angle. So they come down. So you'll see the big toe kind of aims up, and the little toe aims out. And this has to do with the skeleton orientation of our foot. So they are different. You can't just use 5 big toes across your feet. They're going to look funny. Now, how do we get that started? Well, we're going to select these first 2 faces here for the big toe. We're going to extrude these out. Now, for this one, I'm going to use the hotkey, the shift technique here. So I'm going to hold down shift and just kind of pull that out. And there we go. We get our first extrusion. And this is going to be for the base here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull this out for the length. Before we do that, though, we might want to just round and scale this a little bit. A nice tool I like to use that can be quick for this is going to be the circularize tool. It doesn't always work out that well here, but it can work okay. It's a newer tool. I think it was added in Maya 2016. I'm a longtime user, so 2016 seems like yesterday. But this circularize tool up here, if you click this, actually just circularizes these and makes them into a circle. And you can use the twist here to kind of straighten these. Now you'll notice it did not make them symmetrical, and that's one downside to this. So I'm actually going to skip using that tool, but it is one you can use. And I am just going to scale these in slightly and just shape them to be a little bit more symmetrical. You could even cheat a little bit by just scaling the top here, scaling the bottom here to make those even, and then coming into this front area here, if you can see what's going on, and adjusting some of these faces to be a bit more even. Maybe even the verts here would be safer, or edges, where we just come in and pull these out this direction a bit more. I don't want this to be super huge. I do want to maintain that same volume. And then just scale this in slightly, so that way we get something like this for the connection point of the toe. And then I'll just hold down Shift and pull this all the way out to the length of the big toe, as seen here. Now, depending on your ethnicity, where you're from, what part of the world, I believe your middle toe may be longer than your big toe. This particular character, they're close to even, but the big toe protrudes more. So just be mindful of that. That's a small change you can make if you want. It doesn't really matter too much, but it is an interesting anatomical observation. We don't spend a whole lot of time looking at feet, so go figure. Okay, so I am going to scale this in a little bit and move it down so it connects with the ground plane and has that angle of the foot. And the other thing I'm going to do is I am going to add a little bit of roundness to it by pulling the top plane back and the bottom plane using these edges to create this sort of shape. Now, following this, what we can do is we can add in 3 edge loops running down this. If you want to add in 3 evenly spaced edge loops, which can be nice, you can come to the Mesh tool, insert edge loop here, click into the options, and just set this to a multi-edge loop. Let me reset this so it's what it looks like. Multi-edge loop here of 3, and just click. And that will go ahead and add in 3. And we can use these to start shaping our object. Now, I might also want to make some slight changes here. I feel like for some reason this looks really big for the base, but yeah, maybe not. We'll just leave it. But let's go ahead and start shaping these in terms of what looks like a toe. One of the first things that's going to really help sell this as a toe is getting the top part to be flatter. And you'll see that in the big toe here. I can actually move these vertices into place here to kind of match this up. And this is where having some reference in front of you can be very useful. If you have toe references, toe images, it can be a great place to look. There's also a good website for this. If we navigate to Anatomy for Sculptors ArtStation, this is one of the books I mentioned purchasing in the start of the course. These guys have amazing anatomy books for 3D artists. I feel like they are one of the best modern ones. They are a bit pricey, so just be aware of that. But they have some really nice things like the form of the foot, form of the hands, things like toes, and we'll be coming in and looking at this as we go throughout this course. Like I mentioned, this is a free resource that they have on their ArtStation, but there is a paid book. They have multiple volumes, all of which are awesome, and this information is from those books. So with something like this, we can see kind of the structure of the big toe, the structures of the little toe a little bit better, and you can see how you have that nice flat area here. For the big toe, it comes up, over, and back into the foot there. So I can use that kind of as my guide. We have the area the big toe takes up, which is going to be what I want this to represent here. So I'm going to want this to have a bit of volume. I'm going to move that back. And then it goes into a bit of a ridge here, where it comes up. Then we have a valley, where it comes down here. And then we have another area where it starts to gradually rise back into the foot. And if there's one thing I can tell, the placement of this kind of feels off in terms of depth. And like I mentioned, it's because the foot does kind of have this arch to it. But I feel like we could have that a lot further back for the length of the toe, just to make it feel a little bit better here. So I'm just going to grab all those and move it and just pull this back into here and continue shaping this a bit to look like a toe. Now, this only really tackles the top portion. There's more to a toe than just the top portion. So let's get to that next. I'm going to straighten these out, though, just to get these a little bit cleaner across here. And take some time editing these. One of the big things I'm missing with the big toe is actually the side profile, which unfortunately isn't well seen in that reference I pulled up from the Anatomy for Sculptors. But the toe is going to come up like this, and that's going to be one of those things that makes a big difference. And then coming back into here, we're going to start to come back up into the top part of the foot. So you'll see I'm going to gradually increase these, and we're going to pull this off of the ground, coming up into the foot here, like so, which feels a little bit strange, but that's going to be what we're going to be getting at for the toe. And you might want to spend a bit more time with this, like I mentioned, maybe even take a look at your own toe to kind of figure out exactly how you want this to go. I know a big factor here is getting that big toe area to read correctly. Maybe making that a little bit more subtle there, and just kind of gradually getting this to have the correct look. And I think one thing that might help with this is getting a bigger part here. Now, remember, this is just kind of the base structure. We are going to come in and sculpt this later. So if you don't get the world's best looking big toe right out the gate, don't worry. We are going to come in and we are going to detail this later to look a lot better than what we currently have. But something like that's going to give us a good start. Now, the other area we need to look at is the width of the toe. And I don't know what's going on here with this base. It's a bit too large. So I'm going to scale that in. And one of the weird things about the toe, you can actually feel this with your finger, is it gets skinnier towards the backside for the big toe, and it kind of gets broader as it comes out towards the tip. So we get something that looks a bit like this, where it kind of chokes in, and then the tip narrows quite a bit to a point. And we can just dial that in to get something we like. And like I mentioned, it may take a bit. We can look at the front view to get a better feel for this, and I'd say that's getting close. I feel like this is still too large on the backside there, or it just needs to be shifted out more, which is kind of weird because that bone protrudes, and I think that's more accurate. But something like that's going to start to give us that big toe that we are looking for, and you can see how that smooths out pretty nice to look like a big toe. Okay, so let's go ahead and get that little partner toe going here. That's going to look a little bit different. So remember the big toe, the toe is going to angle up. This next one, the toe is going to angle out. We're going to start it the same way. We're going to select these two faces and extrude. And we're just going to pull these forward. And then we can use the scale here to scale them in so that they're not coming off of the other area perfectly. And then just take a moment to shape them to be more circular. This is a little bit tricky on the second one because the first one's kind of hogging a lot of room there, but just do your best with it and make this be a little bit more circular. We can go ahead and scale top to bottom a little bit here. So that way we get this. I'm going to flatten the top, flatten the bottom again, and just get something nice and circular here. And we can adjust the top of the foot and the bottom of the foot later. I do like to try and keep that middle edge in alignment as much as possible, but something like that should serve us well. From here, what we can do is the exact same thing where we just pull this out, but we're going to do this a little bit different than we did the big toe. So we have this base here. We're going to extend this to the end of the toe again. We're going to just grab these and shift and just do your best to try and find that toe. It's going to be right around here. Pull it down. And I think that's about the spot. All right, so now that we have this here, we're going to do a couple different things. We're actually going to angle this. So I'm going to rotate these faces down. So they're coming at a more downward angle. And then I'm going to move the top edge down and back to form what's going to be the top. And then this down and back to form what's going to be the toe tip, essentially. Now, I do want to keep this one flat on the ground for the most part, which means that middle area I'm going to pull down to get something like this. So this is going to give me that angle of the toe that we're looking for. Now from here, I'm going to add in 2 edge loops, generally kind of at the midpoints. Once again, you can come up here to the mesh tool, insert edge loop for this if you want, and you can set this to 2. If you want to manually add these, feel free to. I don't think there's a big advantage to this, but it does give us 2 evenly spaced edges. I am going to scale these flat. And what we're going to do is we're just going to angle them again to follow the angle of the foot. So they're flat but angled now. And then pull these up to start to capture the shape of the toe. And I'm just checking this from the side view just to make sure it's not overshooting really quick. But we're just going to double click this whole edge, pull that up, double click this whole edge, and pull that up. And that's going to start to give us that base shape for that second toe that looks different from the first. So we're going to move this down a little bit here and just shape this again. And now we're ready to add in the edge loops that are going to allow us to shape this. So for this one, we're actually going to add in a couple more edge loops than we had for the big toe. We're going to add 1 edge loop down the center of each of these. So I'm going to add a multi-cut edge loop here, here, and here. So we're going to get 3 of those. And now we can use this to shape the toe. Now, once again, feel free to pull up a reference to kind of see how these go. You can have a little sloop up, a little sloop here, a little sloop there. So if we're going to draw this toe, just looking at this, you have sort of your toenail area, then you have a little bit of an arch, then you have a slope and an arch, and then a slope into the foot. So something like this is going to kind of resemble a toe. Obviously a little bit dramatic there, but you'll notice it looks a lot more like a finger, which is kind of interesting than the big toe does. And once again, that's because the big toe is kind of like a thumb, and these are a little bit more like fingers. Now, I am going to start by flattening out the nail here a little bit on this, just kind of pulling down this edge and this edge to kind of resemble that nail end. Then this next one's going to come up, and then as we saw with that slope, this one's going to kind of come down, this one's going to come down a little bit, then we're going to come back up here into the foot. So something like that. And like I mentioned, you can look at your own toes to kind of get a feel for this, but you're going to have a bump, an indent, and then a bump. And I might even pull this one up here for this, and just kind of make this a little bit more subtle. That's a pretty obvious bump. And then the really interesting thing about your toes is kind of the base structure. They have these little fat balls on them, and it actually is fat down at the tip here. So what I noticed with my toes is they kind of are almost like this little gecko finger, kind of like those sticky pads on gecko lizards. And from here, it just skinnies on up into the foot. So it's just kind of a nice little arch for my toe. That's how my toes look. Now you know. Might be the first time you've seen an instructor's toes, but there you go. Nothing weird about it. I'm going to adjust these just to be a little bit more even. And there you go. That is pretty much it. I am going to flatten these. For some reason, it looks like they have a bit of an arc to them. So I'm just going to come down the tops and bottom rows of these toes. Just flatten this so they are straighter. And I'm going to do the same with the bottom. I might do the same with the big toe if it's not already that way. It is. I don't know why this one's so angled. I guess we just didn't do a good enough job straightening them. Well, that will give us a 2. All right. And I might play around with the roundness of the top part. So you'll see how this is perfectly square. So this is where one of those areas also kind of changes. I'm going to flatten these out here in the front, so I'm not dealing with a weird angle. And the front ones are going to taper in a bit to create a nice little tip point. And then as we go back up the foot, I don't know if we can see this in this reference. We can't really. Let me see if they have another reference on here or not of the foot. It'd be nice if they had one just for toes. They do in their book, just so you are all aware. They have one for each part of the body, each little structure. But I don't have that pulled up currently. So we'll see what they have on here for free. Okay, so here's a nice one. Go ahead and open that in a new tab. And this can give us a good idea here of kind of how these go. A little bit. I think maybe not so much for the toe. But you can see, similar to how we did the big toe, it skinnies in the back. So it kind of has this bulbous front, and it gets wider along the joint. So you can kind of feel that. The tip area is going to be pretty wide here. But then coming in here, when we get past this, we're going to skinny a bit up until we get to a joint, and then it's going to come out and be wider again, and then it's going to skinny a little bit. So something a bit like this for this top area is going to give us an okay read, I would say, for a toe. And once again, we are going to sculpt these, so if your toes don't look like a masterpiece in Maya, that's okay. But you should try and avoid making them look like squares as much as possible. You do want to get that toe shape, because the more work we put in here, the less work we have to do in sculpting. So just be mindful of that. And there's not really a whole lot of anatomy to the toes, unlike other areas of the body. A toe is, a majority bone. So the structure you get inside of something like Maya is pretty much the structure you're going to end with. So something like that can give me a start to those. I might want to explore scaling these just to be straight and flat on the big toe. Maybe not that straight and flat. Remember, we did angle those, but I don't like the angle that's sitting at, so I am going to take a moment here to adjust these. If you need to, you can always rotate them back to be the angle of the foot here, but keeping these relatively even is nice. Usually I use the circularize tool and just kind of deal with it, adjusting the symmetry, but this time I took this approach. Okay, so I am going to leave it there for my toe, I think, and stop fretting over it. But when I press 3 now, you can see how that's going to give me a nice looking toe shape, and you can see that difference in toe angle that I was talking about when we first started exploring the toes here, where you have the big toe, which essentially points up like so, and you have the other toes, which sort of point forward like so. All right, so that is going to be the toes. What we're going to look at next is duplicating this toe out to get the rest of our toes. Let's go ahead and save our progress, though. And as a challenge, what I want you to do is go ahead and model in the big toe of your human base mesh and model in the second toe of your human base mesh. All right, so go ahead and get these in place. And we're going to look at how we can duplicate that toe we just made to be all of our other toes to save us some time next. Okay, so now that we have these toes in place, we're going to go ahead and shape these a little bit more. One of the things I'm going to do is I am going to pull this back here on the top part of this foot just to get a nice little angle. And then this is going to give me an idea of the angle for the rest of these toes. Now, the toes all sit back at sort of a half-notch angle. We did flatten these a little bit here. I think we might be able to see this one on the side view a little bit better, and this may be a mistake I made. These do feel a little bit too far back for some reason, in which case I could just grab these and kind of pull them forward to match up with that angle a little bit more. I don't know why, though. The toes feel like they're in a good spot, so I think I'll just let this be back a little bit further than it is in my reference image. But I am going to pull this back a bit, and maybe in a little bit, and then just kind of pull this next one out to start forming a bit more of an arc running across here. And you can see that in some of the reference that we're looking at, how it kind of goes at this almost foot-shaped arc here. So that's something I'm trying to capture a little bit in terms of this. I don't feel like I'm getting it as strongly as I would like on these areas, and it could be a factor of maybe needing to adjust some of the toes to have better placement, more so than anything, but that should give us an okay start. Once we have something we're satisfied with in that regard, we can go ahead and start modeling these toes to look a little bit better in terms of their structure and start the duplication process. So I do feel like that's okay. For some reason, I just feel like these toes feel a little short, though. And the only surefire way to give these length is to pull this line back a little bit more. That will start to lengthen these a bit, and I'll do the same thing here. Just kind of pull these back. Something like that. Okay, so what we're going to do in this section is we're going to duplicate that second toe, and we're going to basically just put it into these slots. Now, in order to do this correctly, we do have to turn off symmetry. So we are going to turn that off. And we are going to duplicate our model. So I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate this. Now, a nice little trick I like to do is use this isolate select here. This allows me to isolate the whole model. And then I'm going to come down to the toe here. I'm going to select the two tips of the toe. So those two faces. And then I'm going to do a select and grow. And then grow this all the way out to the back. Now, for the select and grow, you can use the hotkey here, the little arrow. You can click the button, or you can use G to repeat last command. I'm going to use G because I prefer that. Get that all the way to that base. And once you have that all selected, I'm going to shift select the whole thing, which is going to invert the selection so it gets everything but the toe, and hit delete. And there's a lot of different ways to get the toe out of there, but that's a quick way for me. Okay. Now from here, I'm just going to do a quick modify center pivot to center this and get it back into here. And then I am going to hit D to move the pivot, V to snap to vertex, and snap to that top corner. And you'll see now I have a toe. Now from here, I'm just going to hold down V and snap to vertex to the existing toe area there. I can then use vertex selections and snap to vertex to snap to the connection points that this is going to need to connect into. So I will just snap these into place like so. And you will see that's going to get me the next toe able to be welded on there. Now the downside, you'll see it's only on one side. We'll talk about that in a moment. I'm then going to Control D this again and do the same here. Snap to vertex so that this is connected. And you might notice that angle feels a little bit weird in correlation, but that's okay. We can nudge this over slightly. And then we'll do the exact same thing with last toe. We'll just snap the vertex there and then continue snapping the vertices so it fits snugly into its toe socket area that's going to connect into. We may want to come into something like this one and move it, but for the time being, we'll just match this up and then fix it as we go. Okay, now you might notice a little bit of an issue where your toes don't quite feel right, and that's because they're not. They do kind of have a receding size to them, and I think one issue is this toe is way too small, and that's one of the things throwing me off. So I am going to come into this toe here, and we're going to make it a bit longer. I want to select all the vertices except for the base ones, and I can move the pivot out to here. So I'm going to hit D with the selection and V to snap to vertex. And I can scale, make sure you don't have any extras. I can scale this forward to be about that length. And that should give me a better look to the toe. I think that was one of the issues I was running into. And now with these, I can do something similar. I can use the scale to scale them in and out so they're offset from each other, and just scale them down where needed like so. And you can look at any foot for reference on this one. If you have a nice top view, that can kind of help you see. You can see here kind of the length these go. So this one falls about the mid there. That falls into that nook. So I'd say this one needs to be a little bit smaller so that it falls into that little cozy there. This next one, this tip, so it falls about back into a similar space. And this one here buds up pretty close to that one. So maybe something like that. And you're going to see that's going to start to give us our foot. Now, the next challenge is we do need to connect these into the body, and we might want to manage our scene in various ways. So there's a lot of different ways we can manage our scene for these connections. For the time being, I'm going to take these two and just put them on a display layer over here and hide them. So we only see one of these at a time. And we're going to start by connecting this one in. Now, to connect this into the foot, once we've created it like we have here, we can isolate the body. We can go into the face mode to delete these. Then we can unisolate the body, and we can just connect this into here. Now, there's a lot of different ways to connect this. One way I like to do it is I actually like to pull this off of here so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better, maybe even scale this in, and then just weld into those slots. So to do this, we're going to have to select the body. We're going to have to shift select the toe. We're going to do a mesh combine. This will combine their components. And now we just need to weld those components back together. My preferred method of connection is the target weld, which we can find in the modeling toolkit. If you come down here to target weld, it lets you weld component to component. So I can click on one vertex and drag to another and just weld that back. And I can do that across each of these. And this is going to connect them to be a singular mesh. Very nice way to do this. And I can go ahead and press 3, and you can see how this smooths out now. I always check with 3 because if there is a weird weld or you missed a weld, it will appear to look different. It will have a sharp edge or something to indicate there's an issue. So I always check my welds with a smooth preview, even when I'm working with meshes that aren't designed for subdivision. So something worth noting there. Okay, so that gives us our first toe. Now I'm just going to activate this. And now that we know how to do this, we can come in here and scale down the base here a little bit. And you can see why we made that snap. Just make sure we can connect. Not really necessary though. And I'm just going to pull each of these forward, and we'll adjust those as we go. Let's do the same thing here. I'm just going to isolate my body here, delete these faces, and then we're going to connect into the toe. Now, if you're not familiar with basic modeling theory and why we delete those faces, internal faces cause issues with subdivision, so you do want to make sure you delete those faces since we're going to make this a subdivision mesh for ZBrush, okay? So that's why I am deleting those. General best practice is to do that regardless. Even if you're not doing a subdivision workflow, you don't need those back faces. Causes what we call non-manifold geometry, which can cause issues with doing UVs and all sorts of other things. Okay, so let's go ahead and select our body, select our toe, do a mesh combine. I'm going to isolate it this time, so that way I'm not seeing that other toe. And just like I did before, I'm going to do a target weld here and weld these into their respective sockets. So that way we get a nice connection. And then once again, we'll just check it with 3 to make sure we are getting the connection we want, which looks good. Now, something a little bit different I'm going to do this time around is I am going to tweak the placement of these edges here in the centers of the toe, just to get something that's a little bit less weird looking going into the pinky toe, because the pinky toe did have some weirdness go into it. But I think that looks good. And you can see how when we smooth, that's going to give us what we're looking for in terms of that foot and toe structure. Okay, so the last contender here, I guess I could have left this isolated. We're going to delete these, and we are going to weld our last little toe onto here. So we'll select this. Just make sure you do have the ability to weld. We'll do a mesh combine, go into the vertex here, and look for these. Now this one got snapped into a weird place right here, so I'm going to try and weld that one first. Sometimes it's easier to come inside the model to see what's going on with a weld. We can just weld there to there, and then do the same here. You can see how being inside here is like, hey, I'm just going to pull this over my head. A little bit easier to see what's going on there. Just make sure you get them all and press 3, and there we go. We have our last little toe attached. And from here, we just want to take a moment to adjust these vertices that we attach them to. Now's the chance for us to kind of come in here and look at how these connected. I don't know why that one was so low, but we can round these out a bit more and make it a little bit more toe-shaped now that we have these volumes in here. And this is where you can start to see some of these things a little bit better. Like, this is going to be that angle I was talking about. Just a bit easier to see once the toes are attached, these different connection points and where they need to be and how they need to go. So something like this will look a little bit better. One other thing I might do is I might slide back these edges. They just are really in a weird spot here. Now, if I just pull these back, it could work. It might not, though. It just kind of depends on how the model's set up. These also are all kind of sitting at a strange angle, it seems like. But I am going to give those toes a little bit more length now that they're on here. And I'm just double-clicking the edges of these last two and kind of pulling them back for the toes. I don't really feel like it's needed for the big toe, but for these ones I definitely do. And I also might want to just straighten the toes a little bit. Now I'm going to go into face mode and try and do this but they all are kind of sitting at a little bit of a weird angle, I feel like. I'm not exactly sure how that happened. But be careful when you do this that you're not selecting anything you don't want to select. But I'm just going to pull these to be a little bit straighter on so they don't have such a strange angle to them. And I can continue doing the same thing down here, just kind of making sure that this has that middle value in mind for that foot. But there we go. Now we have a foot, and we can start to explore shaping it a little bit better. For example, now that we have that toe in place, one thing I can tell you is that that needs to come out here. And you can see how that magically makes us feel a bit more like a foot. I can do the same thing here. And we can really start to read into the footprint a little bit better. It's kind of funny how it's hard to do that without toes in place. But we can take a moment here just kind of shaping that and making it more foot-like. And this is where we can also start to come in here to this inner angle here and maybe add in a bit of an arch coming up to represent the arch that our foot naturally has, and just kind of pulling these and tweaking these to be where they need to be and finishing off the foot to the best of our abilities inside of Maya before we move into our sculpting application, which in this course will be ZBrush. But something like that's going to be a good start, and allowing us to just get something a bit more foot-like inside of here right out the gate. Still feel like we could push some of these things a little bit more dramatically. There is a bone here, like I mentioned, that kind of flares out. An angle gives us that nice foot shape. And yeah, gives us a foot. So I think this is looking pretty good in terms of what we're going for. Looks like it's matching our silhouette fairly well, especially when we press 3. So I think we can call that good for the start of our foot. So make sure you save if you get to this progress point. Kind of a big one, lots of toes added in here. Foot is considered complete. And what we're going to look at next is how to do a mirroring across an object so we can get this onto our other foot. And this is a technique that we have to use every now and then when it's faster to break symmetry, doing things like duplications and welds. But before that, what I want you to do as a challenge is I want you to duplicate your existing toe and use it to create the remaining toes for your foot. Get them all welded and in there together nicely. And then just take a moment after that to spend some time shaping your foot, getting it to have more of a foot-like shape, rounding any forms that need to be rounded, and kind of finishing off the structure of the foot before we move forward to the final portion of getting the foot done, which is mirroring this foot to the other side. All right, so go ahead and give that a shot, and then when we come back, we'll take a look at mirroring. For the next part of this lecture series, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can catch it when it goes live. We're going to give you guys the full modeling section out of the course as a preview. And just as a reminder, if you would like to follow along, sign up for our emailing list below to get the image planes I'm using in this demo. And if you want to take the full course, check us out on Udemy. I'll see you in the next video.